I don't care if your inbred family has been squatting here since the Stone Age. This is my lake now, and you're trespassing on HOA property. That's what Vivian Blackthorne screamed at me while standing on my great-grandfather's hand-built dock, her designer heels grinding into wood older than her entire bloodline. The smell of her overpriced perfume clashed with the pine needles like everything else about this woman clashed with decency. She gestured at 32 identical rental cabins now covering my family's island like a suburban rash. Demolish that shack and pay 85 grand or I'll bulldoze it myself. 3 years later, I stood in that same spot watching her pack the last of her belongings. Turns out every single one of those cabins was built on my property. The courts agreed. And when the judge handed me the keys to her lakefront mansion, the one that was also on my land, well, let's just say karma has a sense of humor. What would you do if your HOA tried to steal your family's generational land? Where are you watching from? And what's your worst HOA nightmare? My name's Ezra Thornfield, and that island has been in my family since 1896. My great-grandfather Silas bought 47 acres of pristine Lake Clearwater wilderness for $200, about what Vivian probably spends on a single manicure these days. 4 generations of Thornfields built their lives on that land. Hand-hewn log cabin, off-grid solar that actually works, rainwater collection system that'd make a prepper weep with joy. We never developed it, never commercialized it. Just lived there, fished there, found peace there. I'm 52, retired marine engineer. Spent 20 years building bridges in places where people shoot at you for fun. Came home 2 years ago after my wife Sarah died. Cancer. The kind that takes everything good and leaves you hollow. The island was supposed to be our healing place, where we'd build a retreat center for veterans dealing with PTSD. Sarah had drawn up the plans herself, sketching therapy gardens where the old fishing trails wound through the pines. Instead, I found myself dealing with Vivian Blackthorne. Picture a real estate agent who sold her soul for a Tesla and a lakefront mansion. 48 years old, divorced from the county zoning director, a connection that gave her more pull at City Hall than a John boat motor. She runs the Clearwater Luxury Communities HOA like her personal kingdom, complete with a 47-page rulebook that makes the IRS tax code look like a children's book. The day she first showed up, I was replacing dock planks, meditative work that keeps your hands busy while your mind processes grief. That's when I heard it. The angry whine of an overpowered speedboat cutting through morning calm like a chainsaw through a symphony. Vivian stepped onto my dock wearing a white pantsuit that probably cost more than my truck, carrying a clipboard thick enough to stop bullets. Her perfume hit me before she did, something expensive and aggressive that made the wood smoke from my morning fire smell apologetic. "Are you Ezra Thornfield?" She didn't wait for an answer. "I'm Vivian Blackthorne, president of Clearwater Luxury Communities HOA. We need to discuss your compliance violations." I set down my hammer, wiped my calloused hands on my jeans, the contrast between her manicured nails and my work-worn fingers telling the whole story right there. "I'm sorry. What violations?" She consulted her clipboard like it contained the nuclear codes. "Your property falls under our expanded community boundaries as of last year. This structure," she waved dismissively at the cabin my great-grandfather built, "violates approximately 37 architectural standards." Now, I remembered reading somewhere during my military legal training that HOAs love to claim expanded jurisdiction, but they need proper legal channels and member votes to do it. Something told me I should probably check if Vivian's boundary expansion was actually filed with the county. Most people assume it was done legally, but you'd be surprised how often it wasn't. "Ma'am, with respect, this island predates your HOA by over a century." "Property law doesn't care about your feelings, Mr. Thornfield." Her smile was sharp enough to gut fish. "You have 30 days to bring this property into compliance or face foreclosure proceedings. The total assessment, including retroactive fees, is $85,000. The locals at Murphy's Marina had warned me about Vivian. "She's got more complaints filed than the health department has roaches," old Dolores had said while selling me boat fuel. "Goes after anyone who doesn't fit her country club vision of lakefront living." Vivian handed me papers thick enough to build a small cabin, turned on her designer heel, and clicked back to her boat. As she roared away, leaving a wake that rocked my kayak against the dock, I caught diesel exhaust mixing with her perfume, a combination that perfectly captured everything wrong with this situation. That night, sitting by the fire Sarah and I had built together, I read every page. Vivian wanted me to remove my solar panels, demolish my composting toilet, pave my garden, and paint everything beige. Basically, turn my family's sanctuary into a suburban nightmare. I looked out at the water, at the oak where my great-grandfather had carved his initials, and made a decision. If Vivian Blackthorn wanted a fight, she'd get one. She just had no idea what she was up against. Week 2 brought a certified letter thick enough to stop a bullet. Blackthorn and Associates Law Firm. Apparently Vivian had promoted herself from real estate agent to legal eagle. The letterhead was fancier than a wedding invitation, complete with gold embossing that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. Her latest masterpiece? My island access road crossed HOA property. Technically true, there's a 50-foot easement connecting mainland to my dock. But now she wanted $1,200 monthly for road maintenance fees. Retroactive 5 years. 72 grand for a gravel path that hadn't seen maintenance since the Bush administration. The first one. The smell of fresh asphalt and bureaucracy filled the air as I drove to the county courthouse. I spent 3 hours in the basement records room, surrounded by files that looked like they'd been there since Moses was in diapers, hunting through property deeds written when people still used fountain pens. That's where I struck gold, the original 1896 deed with my great-grandfather's signature, containing 5 beautiful words. Perpetual right-of-way granted. Back in my core legal training, I'd learned about prescriptive easements. Use a road for 99 years continuously, and the law says it's yours, whether the neighbors throw a tantrum or not. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. I filed my counterclaim that afternoon. Betty, the courthouse clerk who'd probably been there since the foundation was poured, stamped my paperwork with obvious satisfaction. That Blackthorn woman's got more complaints against her than a telemarketer, she whispered conspiratorially. Vivian's response came faster than a NASCAR pit stop. By Thursday morning, my access road looked like a crime scene. Bright yellow no trespassing signs sprouting like weeds, complete with threats of prosecution that would have made a drug dealer nervous. She'd hired private security. One kid named Jerry, who looked about 19 and clearly regretted every life choice that led him to this moment. The poor guy was sunburned the color of a fire truck, drowning in a uniform that could have fit 2 of him. "Sorry about this, sir," Jerry mumbled as my truck approached. His radio crackled with what sounded suspiciously like someone ordering a Big Mac. "Ma'am says I gotta check all vehicles for authorization." Through my windshield, I spotted Vivian on her mansion's deck, watching through binoculars like some kind of suburban spy. The woman had turned property harassment into Olympic sport. "Jerry, you know this road's been in my family longer than that house has existed, right?" The kid shifted like he needed a bathroom break, clearly wishing he'd taken that job at the pizza place instead. "Yes, sir, but orders are orders." I handed him a copy of my prescriptive easement filing. "Give this to your boss. Tell her I'll be using my family's road whether she likes it or not." As I drove past, gravel crunching under my tires like Vivian's dreams of easy money, Jerry stood there reading legal documents with the expression of someone trying to understand quantum physics. Poor kid probably thought security work meant checking parking meters, not refereeing century-old land disputes. The community reaction that evening was pure gold. At Murphy's Marina, Dolores rolled her eyes so hard I worried she'd sprain something. Vivian cited the Johnsons last month for having a fire pit on their own property, said it was a visual disruption to lakefront aesthetics. Hardware store clerk Dan quietly slipped me legal forms with my screw purchase. "On the house," he winked. "We're all rooting for you." By Sunday, 3 neighbors had shared their Vivian war stories. Wind chimes as auditory pollution, fishing boats being aesthetically incompatible. The woman had more complaints than a restaurant health inspector. The battle lines were drawn, and David was about to show Goliath that sometimes the slingshot wins. Month 2 hit like a freight train loaded with concrete mixers and bad decisions. I woke up at dawn to the sound of diesel engines and what can only be described as the mechanical equivalent of a migraine. Outside my cabin window, Lake Clearwater looked like a construction zone had exploded. Barges loaded with lumber, cement trucks on floating platforms, and enough yellow hard hats to outfit a small army. Vivian had gone nuclear. Clearwater Island Resort Development, 32 identical rental cabins sprouting across my family's land like some suburban infection. The smell of sawdust and diesel exhaust replaced my morning coffee aroma, and the sound of hammering started at 6 a.m. sharp, because apparently even construction crews follow HOA noise ordinances. The woman had balls, I'll give her that. She'd broken ground without permits I could find, claiming the island qualified as multifamily recreational zoning, which was news to me, considering it had been residential wilderness since my great-grandfather cleared the first trees. I spent that morning at the county zoning office, a building that looked like it was designed by someone who'd given up on life. The receptionist, a tired-looking woman named Gladys, barely looked up when I explained the situation. You'll want Director Matthews, she sighed, like she'd had this conversation before. Director Matthews turned out to be Richard Matthews, Vivian's ex-husband. Small world, smaller ethics. The man had a mustache that screamed, "I peaked in 1,987 inches and the handshake of wet fish. Mr. Thornfield, right?" He leaned back like he owned the place, which technically he did. "I understand you have concerns about the island development. They're building on my property without permits." Matthews consulted his computer with the enthusiasm of someone checking yesterday's weather. "Actually, I fast-tracked an emergency development permit yesterday. Island qualifies as commercial recreation zone under new county guidelines." Right. Guidelines written by his ex-wife's legal team, no doubt. Here's where my military training kicked in. Back in the Corps, we learned that when local authority is compromised, you go up the chain of command. Environmental violations fall under federal jurisdiction, which means the EPA doesn't care about local politics or who's sleeping with whom. That afternoon, I called the State Environmental Protection Agency. The investigator, Sandra Chen, was very interested in my photos of disturbed eagle nesting sites and direct lake dumping. "We'll be out there Monday," she promised. "Keep documenting." Monday couldn't come fast enough. By Friday, Vivian was celebrating her construction milestone with champagne on the barge. The pop of the cork echoed across water like a gunshot, her laugh carrying on the wind with all the warmth of a dental drill. Her Instagram post that night made my teeth ache. "Dreams don't work unless you do. #BossLady, #Lake Living." The photo showed her in a pristine hard hat, posing next to lumber while construction workers tried to pretend she wasn't there. Then came the accident. During routine crane operations, 3 of my solar panels somehow got cracked, conveniently facing away from the construction cameras, of course. The crew foreman, a mountain called Big Mike, looked genuinely apologetic when he knocked on my door. "Real sorry about that, Mr. Thornfield." His handshake was honest, unlike his employer. "Accident happens, you know." Something in his tone suggested Big Mike wasn't exactly thrilled with his current boss either. But here's what Vivian didn't know. I'd been documenting everything with the methodical precision that 20 years of military engineering beats into you. Photos with GPS coordinates, timestamps, detailed violation logs, every illegal dump, every disturbed habitat, every accident that happened to damage my property. The EPA investigation would find enough violations to shut down the entire project. Portable toilets dumping directly into the lake, construction debris floating like confetti, and one very illegal disturbance of a federally protected eagle nesting site. As I watched another barge load of materials arrive, I almost felt sorry for Vivian. She was spending a fortune building on land she didn't own, violating federal environmental laws in the process. But that sympathy lasted about as long as the sound of her next champagne cork popping. Let her build. Every nail hammered was another dollar I'd eventually collect. Month 3 brought Vivian's most vicious attack yet. I was splitting firewood behind the cabin, the kind of repetitive work that helps process grief and keeps your hands steady, when Jerry appeared with another official envelope. The kid looked more miserable than a wet cat, probably wondering why security work involved so much paperwork delivery. The envelope contained a nuisance property complaint, thick enough to stop a bullet, complete with telephoto photos of my cabin taken from every angle, like I was running a meth lab instead of living quietly on family land. Apparently, my composting toilet violated health and safety standards, my rainwater collection was an environmental hazard, and my entire existence was incompatible with community standards. The smell of wood smoke and autumn leaves couldn't mask the stench of this legal garbage. Vivian wanted the county to condemn my cabin as uninhabitable and force me off the island entirely. The woman had escalated from property disputes to personal warfare. But Marines don't retreat, we just advance in a different direction. The next morning I called County Health Inspector Rodriguez myself and invited him for a voluntary inspection. Sometimes the best defense is making your opponent's lies obvious. Rodriguez arrived 2 days later, a straight shooter who'd clearly seen every kind of living situation from luxury mansions to actual health hazards. He spent 3 hours examining my setup with the thoroughness of someone who cared about facts over politics. "This composting system's better than half the septic tanks I inspect," he admitted, checking my EPA certification. "Your rainwater collection's textbook perfect. Honestly, your cabin's in better shape than most houses built this decade." While documenting my completely legal lifestyle, Rodriguez dropped a bombshell. "Those new cabins across the water, 14 missing permits, including septic, whole developments flagged for violations." I filed a Freedoms of Information Act request that afternoon, something I'd learned in military legal training. Government agencies hate transparency, but they legally have to provide it when you know how to ask. Information is ammunition. You just need to know where to aim. The FOIA response arrived with suspicious speed, probably because someone wanted these violations public. 14 missing permits, septic, environmental impact, wetlands disturbance, each violation carrying enough fines to bankrupt a small country. But the real surprise came that evening when my private investigator knocked on the door carrying 2 beers and a guilty expression. "Hey, easy." Tommy Kowalski, my old Marine squad leader, looked like he'd rather be defusing roadside bombs. "We need to talk." "Let me guess," I said, accepting the beer. "Vivian hired you to prove I'm a dangerous psycho." Her exact words were, "Find dirt or create it." Tommy settled into Sarah's blue porch chair. "Figured you should know what you're up against." The sound of water lapping against the dock provided soundtrack to Tommy's confession. Vivian had commissioned a character assassination campaign, complete with fake social media accounts spreading rumors about unstable veterans and safety concerns. Her neighborhood Facebook group was lighting up with carefully edited photos and misleading posts about threatening behavior. "She's got some petition going around claiming you threatened construction workers," Tommy continued. "Pure fiction, but she's got signatures from people who've never even met you." The irony was rich enough to choke on. A woman illegally dumping sewage, destroying wildlife habitat, and violating enough building codes to flatten a small city was painting me as the dangerous one because I lived off-grid and minded my own business. That night, organizing my great-grandfather's papers by lamplight, I found something that made me nearly spill my coffee. Hidden in an old metal box behind tax receipts and boundary agreements was the original 1896 survey map. My family's island wasn't 31 acres like modern records claimed. It was 47 acres. 16 missing acres that included prime lakefront where Vivian had built her mansion and half her development. I spread both maps across the kitchen table, comparing survey lines to current satellite photos. There was no question. Vivian's entire empire sat on Thornfield family property. The woman had been harassing me for land that was already mine. That discovery hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I sat there in the lamplight, coffee growing cold, staring at 2 maps that told completely different stories about the same piece of earth. The original 1896 survey, hand-drawn with the precision of men who measured land with chains and compass, showed boundary lines extending far beyond what modern county records claimed. Vivian's lakefront mansion, her command center for this harassment campaign, sat squarely on Thornfield family property. Her boat dock, manicured lawn, Tesla charging station, all of it built on land my great-grandfather had paid for with honest sweat and $200. The smell of old paper mixed with wood smoke as I traced survey lines with trembling fingers. Every single one of those 32 rental cabins was an illegal structure on my property. 3 years of construction, hundreds of thousands in development costs, all happening on land she had no right to touch. The implications hit like dominoes falling. This wasn't about defending my legacy anymore. Vivian had unknowingly handed me her entire empire. Every HOA fee collected, every rental dollar, every improvement to her mansion was legally mine under property law. I fired up my laptop and dove into research with the intensity Marines bring to life-or-death situations. Quiet title actions, adverse possession, unjust enrichment. Legal concepts I'd heard about but never needed until this moment became my new vocabulary. Here's what I learned during that all-night education. When property records conflict with surveyor measurements, the surveyor always wins. County clerks make mistakes, computers glitch, and sometimes people deliberately alter records. But iron stakes driven into bedrock in 1896 don't lie, and the law knows it. A quiet title action establishes ownership when records conflict, exactly my situation. Adverse possession requires open, notorious, and continuous use for the statutory period, which Vivian hadn't achieved. And unjust enrichment? That beautiful legal principle lets you recover profits someone made from your property, plus damages and interest. The texture of those old survey papers felt like holding pieces of justice as I compared measurements. Somehow, 16 acres had vanished during the 1987 county computerization. Gladys had mentioned that transition. Lots of records got simplified during digital conversion. Simple mistakes, she'd called them. Simple corruption, more likely. But here's where my engineer brain kicked into overdrive. Direct confrontation would trigger every defensive legal maneuver her ex-husband could manufacture. She had deeper pockets, political connections, and the desperate ruthlessness of someone with everything to lose. Better strategy? Let her keep building. Every improvement was another dollar in my pocket when courts sorted this out. Every rental booking was unjust enrichment I could recover. Every month of delay meant more of her money investing in my property. I thought about Sarah, how she'd approach this chess match. She'd always been the strategic thinker, seeing 3 moves ahead while I studied the board. "Patience, easy," she used to say, her voice soft in the evening light. "Let them hang themselves with their own rope." Outside, lights twinkled from Vivian's mansion, technically my mansion now, where she was probably planning her next attack, completely unaware she was trespassing. The irony was thick enough to cut with her own surveying equipment. The emotional weight crashed over me like a rogue wave. This island wasn't just family history. It was Sarah's dream too. She'd sketched therapy gardens where Vivian poured concrete, planned meditation spaces where construction equipment sat. Every violation was a violation of our shared vision for helping wounded veterans heal. But Sarah had taught me about timing during our weekend strategy games. Strike when your enemy is most committed to their mistake. Right now, Vivian was pouring everything into developing land she didn't own. Let her finish. Let her invest every dollar, every political favor, every ounce of energy into building my retirement fund. I carefully returned the maps to their metal box, next to my great-grandfather's Purple Heart and grandfather's Bronze Star. 4 generations of Thornfields had protected this land through wars, crashes, and tragedies. Now it was my turn to protect it from the worst enemy yet, suburban tyranny disguised as community standards. Tomorrow, I'd build my legal dream team. Tonight, I'd sleep knowing every nail Vivian's crew hammered was another nail in her financial coffin. Building a legal dream team feels a lot like assembling a Marine squad. You need specialists who know their jobs and aren't afraid of a fight. First call went to Rebecca Storm, an environmental lawyer with a reputation for taking down corporate bullies and a win rate that made other attorneys nervous. Her office smelled like coffee and righteous indignation, which seemed about right. Property theft disguised as HOA enforcement? Rebecca leaned back in her chair, eyes lighting up like Christmas morning. "Mr. Thornfield, this is exactly the kind of David versus Goliath case that makes me remember why I went to law school." Second recruit was Frank Morrison, a real estate attorney with 40 years of property law experience and hands that looked like they'd actually held a hammer. Frank had handled more boundary disputes than a medieval cartographer and knew every trick corrupt officials used to lose inconvenient survey records. "Quiet title action's your best bet," Frank confirmed, studying my great-grandfather's survey maps with a magnifying glass. "These original measurements will hold up in any court. Your family's got ironclad ownership going back 5 generations. Third member was Colonel Patricia Hayes, retired Marine JAG officer turned civilian attorney. If anyone understood strategic legal warfare, it was Pat. She'd prosecuted war criminals and defended Marines against trumped-up charges, which made HOA corruption look like jaywalking. "The key is timing," Pat explained during our first strategy session. "We let them dig their own grave, then we fill it in. Every day they continue construction is another day of documented trespassing." My crowdfunding campaign launched that Monday. Save Veterans Family Island from HOA theft. The response was immediate and overwhelming. $47,000 in 3 weeks from supporters nationwide who dealt with their own HOA nightmares. Turns out America's full of people who understand what it means when bureaucrats try to steal your family's legacy. Local businesses donated services faster than I could keep track. Murphy's Marina provided boat transportation for legal meetings. The hardware store donated copying and document preparation. Even the county surveyor, a grizzled old-timer named Carl who remembered when handshake deals meant something, offered to resurvey the property for free. "Been waiting 30 years for someone to challenge those corrupt boundary records," Carl admitted, loading his equipment into my boat. About time someone had the stones to do it right. The evidence-gathering phase felt like preparing for a military operation. Professional surveyor confirmed the boundary discrepancies with GPS precision. Environmental scientist Dr. Sarah Chen documented ecological damage from illegal construction, disturbed nesting sites, contaminated runoff, destroyed wetlands that would cost millions to restore. But the real weapon was forensic accountant Martha Williams, a woman who could trace financial corruption through more layers than a wedding cake. Martha calculated every penny Vivian had made from illegal rentals, every HOA fee collected from property she didn't own, every improvement made with someone else's money. $2.3 million in unjust enrichment plus interest, Martha announced during our Friday strategy meeting. That's before we factor in environmental restoration costs and punitive damages. Here's something most people don't realize. Visual evidence wins more cases than documents alone. We built a 3D computer model showing the original survey boundaries overlaid on current satellite imagery. The encroachment was so obvious, Even a kindergartner could understand it. Sometimes the best legal argument is the one that doesn't require a law degree to grasp. My psychological warfare was simpler. Kindness. Every morning I'd bring cold water and sandwiches to the construction crew working in the heat. Amazing how chatty people get when you treat them like human beings instead of enemies. Big Mike, the foreman, started sharing information without being asked. Miss Blackthorn's got the crew working overtime to finish before winter, he mentioned one afternoon. Keeps changing the plans, adding more cabins. Says she needs maximum rental income to cover her expansion costs. Translation: Vivian was leveraged to her eyeballs, betting everything on this development. The deeper she dug financially, the more devastating her eventual collapse would be. Rebecca coordinated our media strategy with military precision. Marcus, the newspaper reporter, prepared his investigative series for post-trial publication. Environmental groups planned press conferences. Social media influencers were briefed and ready to make this story go viral the moment we won. We get one shot at maximum impact, Rebecca explained. Public vindication, environmental justice, and veteran rights all in one perfect storm of righteous fury. Meanwhile, I practiced my testimony until I could recite property law in my sleep. Pat recorded practice sessions critiquing my delivery like a drill instructor fine-tuning a recruit. The facts were on our side, but presentation matters in courtroom theater. The knowledge I gained during those preparation months was worth more than any law degree. Property boundaries are established by surveyor measurements, not county computer records. Environmental violations can void construction permits retroactively, and unjust enrichment allows recovery of profits plus damages when someone builds on your land without permission. As autumn deepened and Vivian's construction neared completion, I felt like a hunter watching prey walk into the perfect trap. Every day brought her closer to financial ruin and me closer to justice. The woman who'd tried to steal my family's legacy was about to learn that some fights you just can't win with money and corruption. The war room walls were covered with maps, photos, and legal timelines that looked like something from a Pentagon briefing. But the most important document sat in a place of honor on my desk. Sarah's original sketch of the Veteran Retreat Center, showing therapy gardens and meditation spaces where healing could happen. Soon, very soon, that dream would become reality. Month 6 brought the kind of panic that makes desperate people do stupid things. Vivian had somehow discovered my courthouse visits through her network of gossips and political cronies, and the woman was unraveling faster than a cheap sweater in a washing machine. Her first move was predictably ruthless. She tried to dump all 32 cabins on the market at fire sale prices. Cash only, immediate closing, 40% below market value, according to the real estate listings that popped up overnight like mushrooms after rain. The smell of her desperation was stronger than the diesel fumes from her construction equipment. But here's something Vivian didn't understand about property law. You can't sell what you don't own. That morning I filed a lis pendens on every single property she was trying to unload. A legal notice that warns potential buyers about pending litigation that could affect ownership. It's like putting a scarlet letter on real estate that says, buy at your own risk. The lis pendens filings hit the market like a hand grenade in a flower shop. Within hours, 3 potential buyers had backed out, and Vivian's real estate agent was fielding phone calls from lawyers asking very pointed questions about property titles and survey records. I maintained my poker face during our chance encounters around the lake, acting like a man who had nothing more pressing to worry about than whether the fish were biting. Meanwhile, Vivian was running around like her hair was on fire, which it basically was. Then came the bribery attempt. Richard Matthews, her ex-husband, the zoning director, showed up at my dock on a Tuesday evening carrying a briefcase and the kind of nervous energy that screams felony in progress. The man's mustache was twitching like a dying caterpillar and his handshake felt like grabbing a wet fish. "Mr. Thornfield, I think we can resolve this situation amicably," he began, setting his briefcase on my picnic table like he was negotiating arms treaties. $200,000 cash, no questions asked. You drop the legal challenges, we all walk away happy. What Matthews didn't know was that I'd started recording every conversation related to this property dispute. Back in my military intelligence days, I'd learned that documentation protects honest people and destroys corrupt ones. My phone was recording everything while sitting innocently next to my coffee cup. "That's a generous offer," I said carefully. "But what exactly am I supposed to be walking away from?" "Well, you know," Matthews shifted like he needed a bathroom break. "These property boundary disputes can get complicated, expensive. Sometimes it's better to just accept a reasonable settlement and move on with your life." Are you saying the permits you approved for that development weren't legitimate? The silence stretched longer than a Sunday sermon. Matthew's mustache twitched again, and I could practically hear the wheels spinning in his head as he realized I'd just gotten him to implicate himself on tape. I'm just saying everyone deserves to be compensated for their inconvenience. The recording captured everything. His admission that the permits might be questionable, the cash offer that sounded suspiciously like a bribe, and the nervous tremor in his voice that suggested a man who knew he was in over his head. After Matthews left with his tail between his legs, Vivian escalated to pure harassment. Her security team started accidentally blocking my boat access daily, claiming they needed to inspect my vessel for safety violations. The same boat I'd been using for 3 years without incident suddenly became a maritime hazard in their eyes. Construction crews received new orders to work directly outside my cabin windows during the hottest part of the day, running generators and concrete mixers at maximum volume. The noise was designed to drive me off the island through pure sonic torture. Jackhammers at dawn, backup beepers at midnight, diesel engines running 24/7 like some kind of industrial purgatory. Vivian filed noise complaints about my generator, which was rich considering her operation sounded like a construction site having a nervous breakdown. She also started spreading rumors that I was planning to sell the island to developers, trying to turn my own community against me. But here's what Vivian didn't realize. I'd been installing security cameras with audio recording capability for weeks, documenting every incident of harassment with the methodical precision that 20 years of military engineering beats into you. Every blocked access, every noise violation, every accidental disruption was time-stamped and GPS coordinated like evidence for a war crimes tribunal. The community was watching this circus with growing disgust. Even people who'd initially supported Vivian's development were starting to see her true colors. When you spend your days harassing a grieving veteran on his family's land, public opinion tends to shift against you pretty quickly. My biggest ally turned out to be Big Mike, the construction foreman who'd grown increasingly uncomfortable with his employer's tactics. He started warning me about sabotage plans, sharing inside information about permit violations, and generally acting like a man whose conscience was finally winning out over his paycheck. "She's talking about accidental damage to your cabin foundation," he whispered during one of my water deliveries. "Wants it to look like natural settling, but we both know better." By month's end, I had enough documented harassment to file federal charges and enough evidence of corruption to bring down half the county government. But patience is a virtue, and Sarah had taught me that the best revenge is success served ice cold. Let Vivian keep digging. Every shovelful of dirt was just making her grave deeper. Month 8 brought Vivian's final, desperate gambit, a full-scale character assassination campaign that would have made Joseph McCarthy proud. She'd hired a PR firm called Reputation Defenders to manage what they euphemistically called crisis communications, which in plain English meant turning me into the villain of my own story. The smell of panic was stronger than the autumn leaves rotting on the shoreline as Vivian's carefully constructed empire started cracking at the foundation. Her fake social media accounts multiplied like a virus, spreading stories about the unstable veteran who was terrorizing peaceful families with threatening behavior and dangerous activities. The irony was thick enough to drown in. A woman who'd illegally dumped sewage into the lake, destroyed federally protected wildlife habitat, and violated more building codes than a third-world dictator was painting me as the menace to public safety. Trial date was set for December 15th. Exactly 3 years to the day after Vivian's first harassment visit. Rebecca had filed for injunctive relief and damages that would make a lottery winner blush. Environmental groups scheduled press conferences. Colonel Hayes organized veteran supporters for maximum courtroom impact. But Vivian wasn't going down without a fight that would make a cornered rattlesnake look reasonable. The political pressure started with Mayor Thompson, Vivian's golf partner and obvious co-conspirator, showing up at my dock with the kind of forced smile politicians wear when they're about to screw you. The man's cologne was so strong it probably violated EPA regulations. "Ezra, buddy," he began, like we'd been drinking beer together for decades instead of him ignoring my existence, until now. "This whole legal thing's gotten out of hand. Why don't we settle this quietly? Avoid all the unpleasantness." Translation: his political career was tied to Vivian's success, and my lawsuit threatened to expose corruption that went straight to City Hall. What unpleasantness would that be, Mayor? "Well, you know how these things go. Bad publicity, business license reviews, code enforcement investigations." His smile never wavered, but the threat was clear as lake water. Sometimes it's better for everyone if problems just disappear. 3 county commissioners received anonymous threats that week, probably from the same PR firm handling Vivian's image makeover. Rebecca discovered that Matthews, the zoning director, was planning to resign before trial, hoping to escape federal corruption charges by claiming ignorance and early retirement. Meanwhile, Vivian pulled her nuclear option. She tried to have my cabin condemned as structurally unsafe through an emergency order that bypassed normal inspection procedures. The building inspector who owed her favors showed up with a clipboard and an attitude, ready to rubber stamp whatever condemnation order she'd already written. Unfortunately for Vivian, I'd done my homework. That inspector, a man named Briggs who looked like he'd learned construction from watching YouTube videos, had his own history of taking bribes for favorable reports. Rebecca's investigation had uncovered 3 previous cases where Briggs had been disciplined for irregularities in his inspection reports. "This cabin's a death trap," Briggs announced after a 10-minute walkthrough that barely qualified as tourism. "Foundation's compromised, electrical's dangerous, whole structure needs immediate demolition." "Based on what specific code violations?" I asked, phone recording every word. Briggs fumbled through his clipboard like he was looking for his car keys. "Well, it's obvious to a trained professional. Safety hazard, clear and present danger, needs to come down before someone gets hurt." What Briggs didn't know was that I'd had the cabin professionally inspected 2 weeks earlier by the county's most respected structural engineer. The report showed my great-grandfather's craftsmanship was still sound enough to survive another century, assuming someone didn't deliberately sabotage it. The community rallying was beautiful to watch. Local businesses started displaying "Support Ezra" signs like campaign posters. Murphy's Marina organized a boat parade around the island. 37 boats circling my property in a show of solidarity that made my eyes water. The hardware store's Ezra Thornfield legal defense donation jar was overflowing with quarters and conviction. Most touching was the elementary school class that sent handmade good luck cards, drawn in crayon with messages like, "Don't let the mean lady take your house," and "Veterans are heroes." Sometimes wisdom comes from the mouths of babes who haven't learned to lie yet. Vivian's construction crews were working weekends now, racing to finish cabins before the trial exposed their illegal status. The sound of hammering and diesel engines created a constant background noise that made the lake feel like a war zone, which wasn't far from the truth. Hidden cameras captured everything. Vivian instructing workers to dump construction waste directly into the lake, audio recordings of bribery attempts to county officials, financial records showing fraudulent permit payments that would make forensic accountants weep with joy. The final evidence collection felt like preparing for D-Day. Environmental testing proved groundwater contamination from illegal septic systems. Financial analysis showed cash payments to officials who suddenly couldn't remember receiving them. Video surveillance documented everything from harassment to environmental crimes. That last weekend before trial, I sat in the cabin my great-grandfather built, looking through Sarah's sketches of the veteran retreat center we'd planned together, therapy gardens where Vivian had poured concrete, meditation spaces where construction equipment sat, healing centers where corruption had taken root. But healing was coming. Justice was 3 days away. And Vivian Blackthorne was about to learn that some fights you can't win with money, politics, or PR firms. The truth has a way of rising to the surface, like oil on water or bodies in a lake. December 15th dawned crisp and clear, the kind of morning that makes you believe in divine justice. The courthouse steps looked like a media circus had exploded. News vans with satellite dishes, protesters with "Support Our Veterans" signs, and enough camera equipment to film a Hollywood blockbuster. Inside, the courtroom was packed tighter than a stadium concert. Standing room only, with people lined against the walls like they were witnessing history instead of a property dispute. The smell of nervous energy mixed with old wood and the faint aroma of Judge Samuel Crawford's legendary black coffee. Vivian arrived in a designer suit that probably cost more than my truck, flanked by 5 lawyers who looked like they'd rather be defending war criminals. She took her seat with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a fight that money could fix. I wore my Marine dress uniform with my grandfather's Purple Heart pinned over the left pocket, not for show, but because some battles deserve to be fought in proper armor. Rebecca sat beside me, looking like a prosecutor who'd found the smoking gun, the murder weapon, and a signed confession all in the same evidence box. Judge Crawford was exactly what central casting would order for no-nonsense rural judge. Gray beard, weathered hands, and eyes that had seen enough corruption to spot it from orbit. His reputation for cutting through legal bullshit was legendary in 3 counties. "This is a quiet title action regarding property boundaries at Lake Clearwater," he began. voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been separating truth from fiction for 30 years. Plaintiff claims ownership of land currently occupied by defendant's development. Let's see what the evidence shows. Vivian's lead attorney opened with the confidence of someone billing $600 an hour. Your Honor, this is a frivolous lawsuit by a disgruntled individual attempting to extort money from legitimate business development. Miss Blackthorne has operated within all legal parameters. The gallery shifted restlessly as he droned on about property rights and lawful development, painting Vivian as a victimized businesswoman being harassed by an unstable veteran with delusions of ownership. Then Rebecca stood up, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit A, the original 1896 survey map of Thornfield family property. The courtroom projector displayed the hand-drawn survey, complete with compass bearings and chain measurements that looked like artwork compared to modern GPS precision. Gasps rippled through the gallery as the boundaries became clear. Vivian's face went white faster than paint in a blizzard. And Exhibit B, the current county records showing mysteriously reduced property boundaries. The modern map appeared beside the original, the difference obvious enough for a kindergartner to spot. Finally, Exhibit C, our 3D model, showing defendant's development overlaid on the original property boundaries. The courtroom erupted. The computer model made it crystal clear that every single cabin, plus Vivian's mansion, sat on Thornfield family land. Judge Crawford gavelled for order, but the damage was done. 32 rental cabins and a lakefront palace built on stolen property. But the real fireworks started when Vivian took the witness stand. Under oath, she swore she'd thoroughly researched all property boundaries before development. Rebecca smiled like a shark smelling blood in the water. Miss Blackthorne, you hold a real estate license, correct? Yes. And part of licensing requires understanding survey records and boundary disputes? Of course. Then you're familiar with the legal principle that survey measurements supersede county computer records? Vivian's pause lasted long enough to order lunch. I relied on official county records. Official records that showed 16 missing acres from a property that hadn't changed hands since 1896? Another pause. I assumed the records were accurate. Rebecca played the audio recording of Matthew's bribery attempt, Vivian's voice clear as a bell instructing her ex-husband to handle the permit situation quietly. The courtroom went silent except for the sound of political careers exploding. Your Honor, Rebecca continued, this isn't a boundary dispute. It's a case of deliberate property theft disguised as HOA enforcement. The coup de grace came when Rebecca called County Clerk Betty to testify about the 1987 computerization errors that had mysteriously reduced property sizes for several politically connected families. Betty's testimony revealed a pattern of corruption that reached back decades. Judge Crawford called an immediate recess as reporters stampeded for the exits, broadcasting news of the century's most spectacular property rights case. Outside, environmental protesters chanted while veterans in dress uniforms stood at silent attention. Day 2 brought the environmental scientist's testimony about ecological destruction, Big Mike's confession about illegal dumping orders, and the forensic accountant's calculation of $2.3 million in unjust enrichment. Vivian's legal team tried damage control, but you can't polish corruption into compliance. The verdict came after 2 hours of deliberation that felt like 2 years. The court finds for plaintiff Ezra Thornfield, Judge Crawford announced. Defendant will immediately vacate all illegally constructed properties. Plaintiff is awarded full ownership of disputed lands, $2. $3 million in damages plus legal fees and permanent injunction against further harassment. The courthouse steps erupted in celebration. Veterans presenting colors, environmental groups declaring victory, and media coverage that went national within the hour. Justice had been served with a side of public vindication that would be talked about for decades. In the crowd, I spotted Vivian fleeing through the back entrance, probably wondering if her lawyers took payment plans. The aftermath moved faster than a spring thaw. Within 72 hours, all 32 cabins legally became mine, along with Vivian's lakefront mansion and every improvement she'd made with my unwitting property investment plan. Her HOA dissolved faster than sugar in hot coffee, leaving behind nothing but legal bills and very expensive lessons about property research. Vivian herself disappeared to Florida, where she apparently faces new legal troubles involving swampland sales and something called a timeshare pyramid scheme. Some people never learn that you can't build a career on other people's misery. It's like building a house on quicksand. The transformation began immediately. Those 32 identical suburban nightmares became Clearwater Veterans Retreat, a healing center for warriors dealing with PTSD, depression, and the invisible wounds that follow you home from war. The irony was beautiful. Vivian's greed had accidentally built exactly what Sarah and I had dreamed of. Big Mike became head of construction and maintenance, leading a crew of local guys who understood the difference between building something meaningful and building something profitable. His first project was converting Vivian's gaudy mansion into a community center with meeting rooms, a library, and a dining hall where veterans could share stories without judgment. The environmental restoration took 6 months but felt like resurrection. We removed illegal septic systems and installed proper waste treatment that actually improved lake water quality. The Eagle family returned to nest in the old oak tree, probably relieved that the construction chaos was over. 47 acres became a protected conservation easement, ensuring no future Vivians could turn paradise into a parking lot. The $2.3 million settlement funded everything we dreamed and more. Operations for the retreat center, including free counseling and nature therapy, the Sarah Thornfield Memorial Scholarship for military families pursuing education, a legal defense fund for other families fighting HOA overreach and property theft. But the most rewarding part was watching healing happen. Veterans who arrived broken began to find peace in the same woods where my great-grandfather had found his sanctuary. Therapy gardens bloomed where concrete had been poured. Meditation spaces arose where construction equipment had sat. Sarah's sketches became reality, and I swear I could feel her smiling every time someone found a moment of peace by the water. The legal precedent became a powerful weapon for property rights advocates nationwide. Rebecca Storm's victory inspired legislation requiring surveyor verification for all boundary disputes, preventing future computerization errors that mysteriously benefit the politically connected. Our case became required reading in property law classes, which means law students will be learning about Vivian's spectacular failure for decades. The community celebration was everything a small-town victory should be. December 15th became Island Independence Day, featuring local music, veteran recognition ceremonies, and environmental education that brings families together for something more meaningful than shopping mall visits. Even former skeptics now proudly support the retreat center because healing veterans is something decent people can rally behind. The annual festival raises funds for lake conservation and veteran support while celebrating the triumph of truth over corruption. Children who once sent crayon drawings now bring their own kids to learn about standing up to bullies, whether they wear uniforms or business suits. Marcus the Reporter won a state journalism award for his investigative series about HOA corruption and environmental crime. His follow-up stories revealed similar cases across 3 states, inspiring other families to fight back against bureaucratic theft disguised as community improvement. Rebecca's considering a run for state attorney general on a platform of property rights and environmental protection. She'd have my vote and probably yours too, because lawyers who fight for justice instead of billable hours are rarer than honest politicians. Last week, 3 more families contacted me seeking help with their own property disputes. Apparently, Vivian's method of expanding boundaries through creative record-keeping was more common than anyone realized. The Legal Defense Fund is already helping a retired teacher in Montana whose improved property records somehow gifted 2 acres to a resort developer. This morning, I sat on the same dock where Vivian first threatened me, watching veterans from across the country find peace in therapy gardens that bloom where her cabins once stood. The smell of pine needles mixed with coffee from the community center, replacing the diesel exhaust and desperation that once poisoned this place. Sometimes the best revenge really is building something beautiful from the ashes of someone else's greed. Patience and truth defeated money and corruption, proving that David's slingshot still works when the cause is just. The retreat center welcomes 50 veterans monthly, providing free counseling, nature therapy, and the kind of healing that only happens when wounded warriors help each other. Sarah's vision lives on in every life touched, every family restored, every moment of peace found by the water where 4 generations of Thornfields learned that home is worth fighting for. Share your HOA nightmare story in the comments below. You're not alone in this fight. Subscribe for more David versus Goliath justice stories that prove the little guy can still win when the cause is right. Like this video if you believe in fighting for what's yours, and ring the bell so you never miss an update when justice gets served ice cold. The lake is peaceful now, the way it was meant to be. Eagles soar overhead, veterans find healing, and somewhere in Florida, Vivian is probably learning that karma has a very long memory and an excellent legal team.